Regards from Yerushalayim, Yir HaKodesh. Quick thought on Parshat Achrei Mot. All right, and the topic that I chose was it's not enough just to come to Shul. Where did I get that from this Parsha? So I'll try and explain as follows. The two most significant portions of Parshat Achrei Mot are certainly the Yom Kippur Avoda. Right, you have a description of what the Kohen Gadol does on Yom Kippur in the Beis HaMikdash. And that, of course, is very famous. We read through it in Musaf on Yom Kippur, but that's the beginning. And the end is the list of arayos, the list of forbidden sexual relationships in Judaism, right? Those are the big pieces. And the truth is, those are actually not so hard to fulfill, right? Okay, the Kohen Gadol does everything for you on Yom Kippur. You don't have to do all that much, right? You go through Yom Kippur, you get atoned. And at least for us, it's interesting. If you look in the Rishonim, it seems that the Jews in Egypt had great difficulty separating themselves from familial relationships in that sense. For us, right, not sleeping with members of one's family is actually relatively simple. We don't have right, the taiva for that, the desire for that is certainly, I think, overwhelmingly gone. Right? And therefore, we can check Parshas Achrei Mos off, right? We did that one, good to go, and then move on to Kedoshim. Kedoshim, of course, a little bit harder, but not so fast. I want to point your attention just to two things. The first is a very strange pasuk. Not strange in the content, but in the placement, right? In the 18th chapter of Vayikra, the last parak of Achrei Mos, you have a whole list of arayos, right? Your sisters and mothers and fathers and daughters-in-law and sisters-in-law, etc., etc. Right? You then have at the very end, it tells it's right. This is the source for the prohibition on homosexual activity and bestiality. Right? Zachar, that's pasuk Chavbez and Chav Gimel. Zachar lo tishka mishkevei isha. Etc. But in between the list of forbidden relationships between man and woman, and then man and man, is the following pasuk: "Mizarachalo titen la'avir la'molech, lo tchalel Hashem Elokecha ani Hashem." Right, you should not take from your offspring and give it to the Molech. The Molech was an ancient god, right? And either they would pass the child through the fire, or they would have the fire, right, consume the child. Right, is an argument as to exactly what molech is, but it's some sort of fire ritual with your children. And that splits in between the list of prohibited male-female relationships and male-male relationships. But what in the world is that pasuk doing there? It has nothing to do, at face value, with relationships between people. Right? It is an idolatrous law, not a law of sexual relationships. What in the world is it doing there? So it definitely serves two purposes. One is to split between the first list and the second list. Right? The first list is a list of relationships, people you cannot be with, but in theory, you could have children with, but those children would become mamzerim. They would be negatively affected and labeled as mamzerim as what we call halachic bastards. Not in a pejorative sense, but in a definitional sense. A product of one of these relationships is a mamzer, right? The last two, and not that they should be compared, but both homosexuality and bestiality are unions or relationships which will not yield a child. And therefore, at some level, this pasuk comes to split between the prohibited relationships that might yield children and the prohibited relationships that do. But then why choose this pasuk? Why not just have some sort of general stoppage? Ani Hashem Elokecha. I could have just said, Lo tchalel Hashem Elokecha. Don't disgrace Hashem's name. Don't profane Hashem's name. Why include the prohibition of don't give over your children to Molech? And here comes the first idea, and I saw it in a few of the Achronim. that in addition to ensuring, right, that your children are not mamzer, that they are of good status in Judaism, right? So that's number one, but that's the easy part. Number two is, what do you do with your child in the future? Right? This comes to teach you, say the Achronim, that not only do you have a responsibility to make sure your child is born in holiness, but that your child continues to grow in holiness. Right? You have to have a family life that will engender that. You have to teach them, you have to raise them. Right? It's not enough just to figure out who to have the child with or who not to have the child with. That's the easy part. The hard part is the raising, the chinuch, the education, the teaching to make sure that they live productive and holy spiritual lives. Right? That's idea number one. Idea number two is that in between the Yom Kippur Avoda and the list of prohibited relationships, you have a few of kind of like add-ons to all the laws of the Beis Hamikdash, right? That you can sacrifice animals outside of the Beis Hamikdash, excuse me, to cover the blood of the animal, right? Some of the add-ons, and Rav Shamser Raphael Hirsch writes, right, that essentially what the Chumash is teaching us is here, right, that with these are the two areas in which we are most similar to animals, right? We are most biologically similar is eating and having relations. Those are things that animals do. They're very materialistic. And therefore, the Torah goes out of its way to give us many laws to try and guide us in these areas, to try and create a context of holiness in these areas, right? That it's not just enough to have the Yom Kippur service and figure out who not to be with, but that you have to actually create a life of holiness. Right? They have to cover the blood of the animal, right? You have to do all of these different things to remind us, right, not to be like the animals, to treat the animals with respect. But there is a life goal of holiness, and specifically in the areas that we resemble the animals most, right, that we need to sort of really pay attention to and develop and build and grow to a point where we can live a life of holiness. Right. And what I think you see then is, right, in the small details of the parasha, you find exactly that shul is not enough. Right? It's not enough to come to shul once a year or once a week. Right? Judaism is about living a life of holiness. Right? It's about conquering our most material drives. It's about how we live our lives, how we build our families, how we raise our children. There's so much more than just doing a couple of things that create a Jewish people and a holiness in the Jewish people. And I think that's really the hidden underlying meaning of Parshat Achrei Mot. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom. I look forward to seeing you all shortly.